In 1602, rumors began to circulate around the village of Trenčín, present-day Slovakia. Peasant girls looking for servant work in the Seča castle were vanishing. Many looked to Countess Elizabeth Bathory while seeking the truth about the mysterious disappearances. She has been described as the most vicious female serial killer in all recorded history. Where facts end and fiction begins in this terrifying story is now impossible to determine. Some even think she was a vampire with supernatural powers. But there are also truth seekers who put forward the theory that powerful men fabricated those stories and committed the outrages on those girls to seize her wealth. We will look at both sides of the story in this video. Born in 1560, she was endowed with looks, wealth and an excellent education and a stellar social position as one of the Bathory family, who ruled Transylvania as a virtually independent principality within the Kingdom of Hungary. Elisabeta, scion of a powerful Hungarian family and the product of inbreeding between Baron George Bathory and Baroness Anna Bathory, called the castle her home. She received it as a wedding gift from her husband, Hungarian war hero Ferenc Nedesty. She spent her days living a life of privilege surrounded by great wealth, always being taught the ways of an aristocrat. However, Elizabeth also had some other unique instruction. She was allegedly instructed in Satanism by her uncle, a devil-worshipping alchemist, and introduced to witchcraft and sadomasochism by one of her aunts. If that wasn't enough to warp her personality and encourage perversities, she was said to have suffered from epileptic seizures as well as extreme outbursts of rage, often directed towards whichever servant happened to be nearby. When she was 11 or 12, Elizabeth was betrothed to Ferenc Nedesty of another aristocratic Hungarian family. Known as the Black Knight of Hungary, as a soldier, Ferenc was known for disemboweling, impaling and playing football with the heads of Turkish captives and dancing with their corpses. A year or two into their marriage, she had a baby by a lover of the lower classes. Nedesty was reported to have had him castrated and then torn to pieces by dogs. The child, a daughter, was quietly hidden from view, and Elizabeth and Nedesty were married in 1575 when she was 14. Because Elizabeth socially outranked her husband, she kept the surname Bathory, which he added to his own. The young couple lived in the Nedesty castles in Hungary at Sever and Szech, now in Slovakia. Nedesty's wedding gift to Bathory was his household, Katish Castle, situated in the Little Carpathians near Novo Mesto und Váhom und Trenčín, now in Slovakia. The castle had been bought by his mother in 1569 and given to Nedesty, who transferred it to Elizabeth during their nuptials, together with the Katish country house and 17 adjacent villages. Ferenc was an ambitious soldier and was often away. Elizabeth ran the estates, took various lovers and bore her husband 4 children. She was 43 when he died in 1604. In 1578, Nedesty became chief commander of the Hungarian army and embarked on a military campaign against the Ottoman Empire, leaving his wife in charge of his vast estates and the governing of the local populace. Ferenc Nedesty died on January 4, 1604 at the age of 48. It is recorded that the Black Knight of Hungary died of a mysterious and sudden illness in the middle of a battle. The disease which killed him is still unknown. It is known, however, that he had suffered a disease of the lower limbs for at least 2 years before succumbing to the illness. After Nedisty's death in 1604, rumours of Bathory's cruelty began to surface. While at first it was believed that Elizabeth began her killing spree after her husband's death, witnesses testified that the murders began while her husband was still alive and with his knowledge and participation. This is typical of sadistic female serial killers today who target victims for sexual motive. They are almost always accompanied by a male partner, usually dominant, which the female serial killer partner mimics. According to the testimony, at Savar during summer his lordship Count Ferenc Nedesty had a young girl undressed until stark naked. While his lordship looked on with his own eyes, the girl was then covered over with honey and made to stand throughout a day and a night, so that she'd be covered in insect bites. She collapsed into unconsciousness. His lordship taught the countess that in such a case one must place pieces of paper dipped in oil between the toes of the girl and set them on fire. Even if she was already half dead, she would jump up. It was said that she enjoyed torturing and killing young girls. At first they were servants at her castles, daughters of the local peasants, but later they included girls sent to her by local gentry families to learn good manners. She believed that drinking the blood of young girls would preserve her youthfulness and her looks. Witnesses told of her stabbing victims or biting their breasts, hands, face and arms, cutting them with scissors, sticking needles into their lips or burning them with red-hot irons, coins or keys, needles under fingernails and even stitching mouths shut. Other accusations include closing them in a spiked iron maiden, like in a garlic press to extract their blood. She also had a fondness for covering villages in honey and watching as insects and animals devoured them. Some of Bathory's other alleged tortures included forcing victims to cook and eat their own flesh, forcing them to stand in buckets of ice outside until they froze to death, starvation, poisoning, and on one occasion having a gypsy man sewn up into the belly of a dead horse. In addition, witnesses said that Bathory liked using scissors to torture her victims. She used the instrument to cut off their hands, noses, and genitals. One of her favorite pastimes, witnesses said, was using scissors to slice open the skin between her victims' fingers. She allegedly had the girls undressed stark naked, thrown to the ground, and she began to beat them so hard that one could scoop up the blood from their beds by the handfuls. It also happened that she bit out individual pieces of flesh from the girls with her teeth. She also attacked the girls with knives, and she hit and tortured them generally in many ways. One time her ladyship singed the private parts of a girl with a burning candle. Another time her ladyship lay sick and therefore could not beat anyone herself, so a servant was compelled to bring the victim to the countess's bed, whereupon she would rise up from her pillow and bite pieces of flesh from the girl's neck, shoulders and breasts. And these were just a small sample of what she was accused of at her trial. Some were beaten to death and some were starved. The story that Elizabeth used to bathe in their blood seems to have been added later on. Even more than those horrific acts of violence, the sometimes supernatural stories that surround the acts help define Elizabeth Bathory's terrifying legacy today. At the time of Turzil's investigation, some accused her of cannibalism, while others claimed to have seen her have sex with the devil himself. The most damning accusation, the one that inspired her infamous nickname, the Blood Countess, as well as the rumors that she was a vampire, was because allegedly she bathed in the blood of her young victims in an attempt to maintain a youthful appearance. Though previous accounts of the disappearances and probable murders of peasant women had apparently been ignored, the claims in 1609 that she had slain women from noble families attracted attention. Her cousin, Gheorghe Turzil, Count Palatine of Hungary, was ordered by Matthias, then King of Hungary, to investigate. The Count Palatine determined, after taking depositions from people living in the area surrounding her estate, that Bathory had tortured and killed more than 600 girls with the assistance of her servants. According to witnesses, most victims were poor girls lured to the castle with promises of work, but that eventually Elizabeth expanded her sights and started murdering daughters of the gentry sent to the castle for their education, as well as kidnapping girls who would never have come to the castle on their own. The year before her arrest, some 25 women from declining minor noble families were invited to stay at Elizabeth's castle. Some of these minor aristocratic families were happy to send their daughters to Elizabeth, hoping somehow to raise the prestige of their family through an association with the Countess. But during their stay, several of the girls vanished. When concerned parents began to inquire into the fates of their daughters, the Countess reported that one of the other girls had murdered the girls for their jewels and then committed suicide. When her family demanded that the body of the girl be returned, Elizabeth refused, stating a suicide fatality had to be immediately buried unmarked on unconsecrated ground. She explained other multiple deaths as being caused by outbreaks of disease, and citing the fear of an epidemic panic as the reason for secretly burying those victims. On December 26, 1610, Count Gheorghe Turzil paid a visit to the castle of Elizabeth. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw that day. It was the Christmas season, and the Countess was celebrating the holiday in her manor house in town, when on the evening of December 29th, one of her servants, a young girl named Dodiksar from the Croatian town of Redneck, was discovered stealing a pear. Enraged, Elizabeth ordered that the girl be taken to the laundry room, stripped naked and tied. Elizabeth and her female servants took turns attempting to beat Dodiksar to death with a club. Elizabeth was reported to be so soaked in blood that she had to change her clothes. Dodiksar was a strong girl and did not die in the beating. It was getting late into the night when Elizabeth tired of beating the girl and had one of the female servants finally stab Dodiksar to death with a pair of scissors. The girl's corpse was dragged out and left by a doorway in the courtyard for disposal the next morning. At almost exactly that same moment, after travelling 2 days from Bratislava, Prince Turzil's raiding party arrived at the house and ordered the servants to stand aside. As the party burst into the courtyard, they immediately came upon the bloody, battered and still warm body of the murdered girl. A search of the premises revealed the body of 2 more brutally murdered girls in the manor house. Reportedly, a further search of the house on the hill revealed numerous decaying bodies hidden at the bottom of the tower. When the arresting party burst into her chambers, according to legend, she was found sitting on a stool chewing on the mutilated dying body of a girl prostrate before her. Thurzo ultimately charged Bathory with the deaths of 80 girls. That said, one witness claimed to have seen a book kept by Bathory herself where she recorded the names of all her victims, 650 in total. This diary, however, appears to be only a legend. It has never been found. For her crimes, Elizabeth was sentenced to house arrest. As common practice in those days, the trial lasted only for a day. At the end of the trial, 2 female servants were sentenced to have their fingers torn away with hot pincers before being thrown alive into a fire. The male servant, because of his youth, was sentenced to decapitation, and his body was also thrown onto the fire. The 4th defendant was acquitted and vanished from the record. A few months later, another of Bathory's female servants was charged, tried and sentenced to death. Elizabeth desperately petitioned the court to make an appearance to defend herself, but her family blocked those attempts. When she attempted to challenge Thurzo's authority, he condemned her in front of several of her relatives, saying, "You, Elizabeth, are like a wild animal. You are in the last months of our life. You do not deserve to breathe the air on earth, nor to see the light of the Lord. You shall disappear from this world and shall never reappear in it again. The shadows will envelop you, and you will find time to repent your bestial life. I condemn you, Lady of Coctice, to lifelong imprisonment in your own castle." The Countess spent the remainder of her days in a small room in her castle. The exterior windows were bricked up, and only several small openings for ventilation and food gave her the only contact she had with the outside world. On the evening of August the 21st, 1614, Elizabeth complained to her bodyguard that her hands were cold, whereupon he replied, "It's nothing, mistress, just go lie down." She went to sleep and was found dead the following morning. She died at the age of 54. All mention of her name in Hungary was prohibited for the next 100 years. She was buried in the church at Coctice. However, her body was moved soon afterwards when villagers protested at having the Countess of Blood in their cemetery. Her final resting place was in an undisclosed spot in her family crypt in the castle where she was born. We actually come very close to never having heard of Elizabeth Bathory because her trial was held in secret in a remote Slovakian town in 1611, and her powerful family immediately sealed its records. There were no newspapers, pamphlets or broadsides to report on it. None of the ruling families wanted the details of the horrendous charges against their relative released to the public scrutiny. Nor did they want her estates confiscated by the crown or the crown debts to her family cancelled. Elizabeth was not even allowed to appear at the trial, and instead of a public execution, she was walled in alive in a room in one of her remote castles. Her servants and accomplices took her place on the executioner's block, while the Countess herself survived in anonymity in her bricked-in room until the summer of 1614, when she was discovered dead on the floor. Elizabeth Bathory would have remained merely an anonymous monster had not a Jesuit scholar, Father Laszlo Turöczy, discovered in 1720 the trial records, about 100 years after her death. Turöczy restored the legendary female vampire to human form with a name, identity, a history and a detailed description of her crimes, in an ecclesiastical book published only in Latin. In 1796, Michael Wagner, in a book entitled Anthropological Philosophy, was the first to widely publicize the story of Elizabeth's alleged bathing in blood as a skincare obsession. stating that after a chambermaid noticed some hairs out of place in Elizabeth's coiffure, the Countess struck her so hard on the ear that the girl's nose spurted blood into Elizabeth's face. When Elizabeth wiped the blood away from her face, according to Wagner, she discovered that her skin seemed rejuvenated. From then on, she would bathe her entire body in fresh blood and had some 650 girls murdered for this purpose, Wagner claimed. The problem is that when one reads all the other literature on Bathory, the blood-bathing story morphs into different versions, the most common of which states that Elizabeth's handmaiden was struck because she pulled a few strands of the Countess's hair while combing it, resulting in her being struck directly in the face and blood from her nose spurted onto the Countess's hand, who saw her skin become more translucent and young after wiping it away. Moreover, the girls had to be virgins or of aristocratic origins before Elizabeth would believe in the renewing power of bathing in their blood. Something was not quite right with the story, nor were the biomechanics of bathing in blood adequately explained, considering the tendency of liquid blood to rapidly coagulate into a gooey, sticky matter not exactly suitable for bathing. It was not until the 1970s that Boston College professor and Fulbright scholar Raymond T. McNally, along with his colleague Radu Florescu, established rare access to Hungarian and Romanian archives and discovered an abundance of original documents from the trial of Elizabeth Bathory. And it was not until 1983 that we began to get a more accurate glimpse of what crimes the Blood Countess was actually charged with, and the blood bathing became the first myth to fall. Nowhere in the trial record was there any mention of bathing in blood. It was local gossip and folklore picked up by writers in the 18th century and injected into the sordid history. But still, the likely explanation for how this myth took root bodes darkly for what Elizabeth was really into. She was thought to have bathed in blood because she was so covered in it after torturing her victims, so it appeared as if she had bathed in it. The final events that precipitated Elizabeth's arrest in 1610 began when a Lutheran Reverend Janos Ponek-Kenuts was assigned to take charge of a church in the Slovakian village of Koktis, where the widowed Elizabeth lorded in a castle overlooking the village below. Reverend Janos was sent to replace the previous pastor who had recently died. On his journey, just like in a horror film, the closer he came to Koktis, the more Janos began to hear the peasants' mutterings of vampires and mutilations of young women in the town, and guarded warnings of evil deeds in the castle. According to the legend, Janos investigated the reports of murdered girls, carefully collected evidence, and eventually denounced the Countess to his church superiors, who finally called in the civil authorities. In the 1970s, Professor McNally discovered a letter in the Hungarian archives from Janos to his superior describing how the night before reaching the town, Elizabeth sent 6 invisible black cats and dogs to attack him in his home in the middle of the night. As he beat back the attack, screaming, "You devils, go to hell!" none of the servants could observe any of the animals. "As you can see," Janos wrote, "this was the doing of the devil." Here the story of Elizabeth Bathory's trial becomes conspiratorial. There emerged a vast literature in Hungary, particularly in the heady nationalist periods of the 20th century, suggesting that Elizabeth Bathory was entirely innocent and a victim of a family plot to seize her wealth. Since the discovery of more court transcripts and witness statements, Thurzo's correspondence and other archival records in the 1970s, the real story of Elizabeth Bathory is now better known. The secret trial began within 3 days of Bathory's arrest at Thurzo's Courts of Justice in Bajtka on January 2, 1611. All the court officials and jury members owed their allegiance to Prince Thurzo. The plan apparently was to quickly sentence the Countess to life imprisonment, perpetual incarceration. The attempts of the Hungarian crown to seize Bathory's property were evident. Moreover, Bathory was a Protestant when the counter-reformation and restoration of Catholic power became the priority of the Hungarian parliament. Religious sectarian politics exposed the Bathory family to all manner of hostility during that period. Also, Europe was in the throes of paranoid witchcraft hysteria, with thousands of women being accused of heretical and satanic crimes and burned at the stake or hung. Yet at the same time, witchcraft was not one of the charges brought against Bathory. The rumours of her bathing in virgin girls' blood were never introduced into any of the court proceedings, simply because there was no evidence nor any testimony attesting to it. Was Elizabeth guilty of the crimes that she was accused of, or was it a plot by her own family to seize her wealth? It is argued that the proceedings against Elizabeth were largely politically motivated, due to her extensive wealth and ownership of a large area in Slovakia and Hungary, increasing after the death of her husband. Nonetheless, when we examine the charges to the murder of approximately 50 girls, there is a logical consistency to the descriptions of the offences from many different witnesses. One source, dating from September 16, 1610, 4 months prior to Elizabeth's arrest, contained 34 affidavits describing Elizabeth Bathory's torture and murder of many girls and virgins. A second source is dated July 26, 1611, and is from the Crown's attempt to retry Elizabeth. In it is a massive collection of testimony from 224 witnesses attesting to the diabolical impulses of the Countess, who murdered many innocent virgins of noble and non-noble birth. Was indeed Elizabeth Bathory addicted to committing sadistic acts of torture since her adolescent years? That she held the power of life and death over her servants is not questioned, but was she responsible? Were the missing girls perhaps kidnapped and disposed of by her enemies? We will never know for certain the exact truth. History is exactly that, his story. Rumours quickly become fact. We see that often today with fake news. Was Elizabeth really a sexual lust murderer and the accounts are all true? Or was she the victim of a heinous power coup which resulted in a staged trial and quick conviction of a powerful woman? Some suggest that the physical evidence was grossly exaggerated, and Thurzo himself misrepresented dead and wounded patients as victims of Elizabeth, as disgracing her would greatly benefit his political ambitions. And if he was interested in her sexually, it's very believable that her rejection of him would drive him to an obsessive madness, where he'd imagine that she would rather consummate her passions with her maidservants than with him. Elizabeth Bathory owned strategically important land that increased her family's already vast wealth. As an intelligent, powerful woman who ruled without a man at her side, and as a member of a family whose wealth intimidated the king, his court went on a mission to discredit and ruin her. The best case scenario is that Elizabeth abused her servants terribly and enjoyed it, but came nowhere near the level of violence alleged at her trial. and the worst case scenario has already been described. Well, my dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. I had many requests for me to cover Elizabeth Bathory, the story, the history, or what we know of it. So I decided to try and present both sides of the story, of the his story. I suppose some of you may be asking, what do I think? Was she guilty? Was she innocent? And to tell you the truth, I don't really know. I wasn't there. I don't really like to judge unless I, see something with my own eyes, so I don't know. I think it's very probable and possible that she was cruel to her servants, but I think that most servants were badly treated back then. I think at the very best a servant could hope for a dry bed and one square meal a day, if that. But I think a lot of them were cruelly treated. How cruel she was to them, I don't know. Whether the stories were made up, but I don't know. Again, there was obviously a conspiracy against her. It's a very fascinating case, and I'd like to know what do you believe? Do you think she was innocent, or totally innocent, or somewhat innocent, or was she guilty of all these terrible things? I mean, they are terrible if they're true. That's horrendous. God help, those poor servants. My goodness. And the ones that were alive helping her, probably living in terror that the same would happen to them. But anyway, as we know, history can be easily manipulated and changed, and that's why at the end I sort of presented, the alternative that she might have been innocent. I'm not saying that she was, but how easy it is to influence people's opinion. It is quite easy to influence people's opinion, and the government know that. They do it all the time. Fake news. They rewrite history quite often. So I wouldn't be surprised if her history was rewritten. But I'm wondering exactly what she did. There seems to be a lot of different accounts of her outrages, but I would love to know your opinion. Please tell me. Speak out, or forever hold your peace. Yes, so it's coming up to Christmas. My goodness, this year has went fast. So the next projects I'm going to be working on will be I'm going to do a Christmas historical feature for YouTube. I will do that before the Christmas before Christmas Day. Hopefully I'll get it finished in time, and I'm going to be working on the last part of the Lovecraft story. And by the way, there's some people, I realize that it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, the Lovecraft story. It is a bit heavy, but bear in mind I will be doing other stories from different authors. I'm thinking about doing a Stephen King short story. There'll be different authors. I'm gonna, there'll be something for everyone, I'm sure. So don't worry. And these are bonus videos. There'll always be the historical features like this coming. So I will offer variety. Don't worry, it's not going to be just all Lovecraft. And by the way, I would like to know your opinions regarding the subject matter, the videos that I'm making here on Patreon. Is this what you want to see? These types of videos? The vintage crime, the horror history, like Elizabeth Bathory and the Countess Demidoff. Are these the type of things you want? I would like to know all of your opinions. Don't be afraid to tell me. Do you want things like the ones I present on YouTube? The stories of like Lucia Joyce and stuff like that. I would like to know if I'm presenting to you what you want to watch. I would like to sort of get the majority on that. I would hate to think that I'm making videos of stuff that you don't want to see. So I just assumed that I'm making on Patreon the videos that I'm not allowed to really present without censor or cancelling of my revenue. So these are the videos I'm presenting here that I don't present on YouTube. I assumed that this was what you would be wanting to watch from me. But please tell me your opinion. Let me know what you think. I'd love to know. I'd love to know. Yeah, I had fun doing this case. It was quite interesting. I had fun with the images. Disturbing at the same time, of course, sort of cringe and makes the skin crawl when you hear about some of the tortures. But, it's fascinating. That's why we delve into these things, isn't it? And, they've got some more cases coming up next year. Some also ones that are disturbing, but at the same time fascinating. We are drawn to them, and I guess that's why the Oddites gather here on Patreon to explore these cases from the safety of our armchair or bed. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to ramble if I don't watch out, so I will wish you all a lovely time, and we'll definitely catch up before Christmas, that's for sure. I'm going to be busy, I assure you. I will be busy. I'm hoping most definitely to get the third part of Lovecraft out this month. I should have enough time off. I'm going to take a week or two off from my normal job, so I'm hoping to get everything done in time. And on that note, I wish you all a very, very good night or good day to wherever you are. Bless you all. Thank you for watching, my friends. Bye-bye. One last thing before I go. I nearly forgot to include this. This is for aficionados of Bathory. Many years ago, I used to own an ancient oil portrait of Elizabeth Bathory on wood panel. And, so I just thought I'd include that. It got destroyed, but that's another story. But yeah, I had that for many years. I have photos somewhere of it, and I used to collect a lot of weird stuff like that back in the day. I just thought I'd mention that. Some of you might find that interesting. I'm really going now. Bye bye.